You're watching The New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more information and articles about at-scale technologies, please visit thenewstack.io. Now enjoy the show. Hey everyone, I'm so excited about our discussion today with Maya Kaczorowski. And Maya, I've known Maya since her days at Google. She's worked with some startups. She can tell us more about that experience she has. In particular, she is talking about, right now at least, about OAuth and how OAuth really can be really something that is effective for most requirements using AI agents. But there's more to the story than that, and look forward to hearing her discuss why OAuth is really effective for AI agent identity, but also what are some of the challenges to come. And there are some different approaches to authentication that I look forward to discussing with her. Maya, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Maybe we could just start like giving a perspective that you have. You wrote a blog post that was, I think it probably got some good attention, in the community. I mean, I really liked it. It was about AI agent identity, and it's just OAuth. I'm curious in your perspective from that point of view, and then maybe we can get into some more finer grained questions, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. So I wrote the blog post a couple weeks ago now. The context around this was that I was getting a lot of questions from people who were not primarily in the security community asking, hey, like, do you think there's a product or a problem in the space of like AI identity and AI agent identity? And it was very interesting because I just spent the past several months before that talking to a lot of CISOs and security leaders about the top pain points that they have. And this is not something that they were bringing up. So it was coming from people who were outside of the security industry worried about this issue. And I spent some time, talking with some of my friends about it and thinking about it. And I think part of the reason that there is this perception that there's a problem is that people don't realize some of the tools that we already do have, like to your point, like OAuth, that can help us address some of the concerns with AI agent identity.
Okay. And what makes OAuth just so effective?
Yeah. So I think if we think about what, let's talk about different kinds of like AI identity broadly, because I'm sure there's many different things that people have in mind if they're listening to this as to what that means. I primarily think about agents or LLMs. So like maybe I'm working with Claude or ChatGPT or maybe some, other more bespoke tool that's plugged into, I don't know, my sales tool or whatever it happens to be. You might have AI for doing RAG. So like going and looking at a whole bunch of documents and then helping you answer some questions based on that. You might have on-device AI, which is both kind of the, things like Siri that are built into your devices, as well as things that you run locally, again, back to like MCP from Claude or that type of thing. I'm primarily talking about the first category, so like AI agents or LLMs. And in that space, we've been treating, or most people have been treating agents as extensions of themselves, right? So this is an agent that is not necessarily doing something that is fully independent from me. I want it to use some of my context and some of my information in order to help me do research, help me make a decision, whatever it happens to be. And so what I actually want to do is give it a subset of permissions that I have. I want to give it access to some of my data, some of my capabilities in order to let it do its job. And this is like exactly what OAuth is supposed to do. So if you think about like when I'm authenticating one service to another, like maybe you go log in somewhere and it says, hey, do you want to use this app with like your Google profile, and you're giving it access to your calendar, and you're giving it access to like read your documents and add people to them or whatever it happens to be. Like there's already a model for us to delegate a subset of permissions from our individual identities to third parties, and that's exactly what this was meant to do.
So most of what, for instance, a SaaS provider might want to integrate with AI agents can be done with OAuth.
That's my hypothesis or my argument. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So and that then makes OAuth then still it's a good security layer, and it should remain that way. But what happens when you start thinking about, the permission models that you have with agent-specific authorizations, for instance?
Yeah. So if we think about, I have a SaaS app that I'm authorizing an agent to use. There's two concerns in the identity space, right? Authentication and authorization. And a lot of the tools right now that you're using say, hey, plug in your OpenAI API key right here, and then we're going to go do stuff, right? And you don't necessarily know what the SaaS app has allowed that API key to go access. You don't really necessarily know how they're enabling the use of agents in that app. With OAuth, you could both say, "Hey, I want to have multiple agents authenticated as me doing different things. I want this one to be able to go read logs. I want this one to be able to go add users. I want this one to be able to kind of do those kinds of things." So OAuth has the concept of scopes that let you say, these are groupings of permissions that I want to include in this scope. And those are generally tied to user permissions. So like if you had, for example, a product that had like an auditor role or an owner role, right? Think about like something like Google Sheets, right? You can share someone and they can with someone and they can be an editor. So those kinds of levels of permissions are the groups of those is what would make sense to have as like OAuth scopes as well.
So the scopes are essentially the fundamentals, aren't they?
They're the groupings of permissions that we want to give other entities, which could include AI agents.
Okay. So we have Claude, we have ChatGPT. You mentioned kind of some of the issues that could come up with those. I mean, particular if you're thinking about desktop environments, right? What are some of the more challenging authorization problems that do surface?
Yeah, I think that if we're talking strictly about having a user authenticate as themselves and give an agent permissions in OAuth in a SaaS app, like that's theoretically pretty clean, right? The challenge there is going to be around getting a lot of those SaaS apps to actually support OAuth. I feel like OAuth is going to become another like enterprise feature upsell. You're going to have sort of the SSO tax, but for OAuth, you're going to have the OAuth tax. Outside of SaaS apps, I think that what we're dealing with is more about like fine-grained permissions to individual pieces of data that we don't necessarily have the controls that we need today. So if I think about on device, right, something like Claude MCP, there are already controls that you have on Mac OS as an example to go control like what file systems Claude can access. But presumably Siri has slightly different access. The first party solution has slightly different access than something like Claude does. And so how much of this ends up becoming open in the platforms? How much of this ends up being controllable by the user? And more importantly, I should say, understandable by the user, what they're actually giving access to, is going to be interesting. I think we're also starting to see, OpenAI, ChatGPT can go browse the internet for you, right? Um, is it browsing as me? Is that in my search history and my browser history? Or like how is that information being shared between different identities and accounts? Like once it's already on your device, it can do a lot that appears to be as you.
Yes, it can. Uh, Going back to SaaS apps, I mean, you make this comparison to the adoption of Plaid.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and the comparison you make?
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with Plaid, Plaid is the way that you probably link together your bank accounts or any kind of like financial planning tools you might use. And my understanding, and this is from reading articles about Plaid and that type of thing, is that the adoption was initially a lot of organizations were reticent to adopt something like Plaid because it was work, right? This is going to be a bunch of work that I have to add to my engineering roadmap. How does this lead to my company making more money? How does this lead to my users investing more money in our platform? That type of thing. And I think the unlock was when when companies realized that if they used something like Plaid, it was that much faster for users to transfer money into their platforms. And then they could sell them on higher value services like investing advice or whatever it
That's a
happens to be.
business. Yeah, that's a business model, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think the analogy here for me is, um, I suspect people are going to be quite reticent to plug, Claude into your SaaS tool initially, because like, why shouldn't I build my own first party agent? Why shouldn't you buy that from me directly? But if people start to see the value of, maybe I can plug together my CRM and my marketing tool, and there's additional, value that my business can create out of that, then that's much more powerful than, hey, I can upsell you on this specific AI functionality.
One of the funny aspects of, LLMs and AI agents is how they're non-deterministic, right? And humans, you can't predict what a human's going to say ever, really. You can't really, and it's difficult to predict what an LLM will say, right? So you're dealing with lots of different variables here between the human and and the AI agent. So that creates all kinds of different considerations when you have to think about authorization. There's some discussion like on rate limits, and controls and stuff. Could you help me understand that a little bit more and how it kind of fits in that context of that non-deterministic world that we're starting to really see evolve?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, and I think in reality, agents and LLMs are somewhat black boxes. We
Yeah,
don't really know what they're going to do.
right.
We have some ideas, but there's a reason there's an industry around pen testing these LLMs. Is that can we get them to do things that is unexpected? Um,
Yeah,
the the concern here is, if we don't know what an agent's going to do, we probably want like a human in the loop to go review it, right? Uh, and like, I'll give the example of insecurity again, the space I work in. I remember having conversations a few years ago with customers and who weren't excited about having deterministic linear regressions making changes to their environments. I'm not sure those people are going to today be super excited about having AI agents make changes to their environments for security
right,
purposes.
right.
So I think the need here around things like rate limits are, you want to have limitations on what an agent can do. So again, if an agent has a subset of permissions from what a user has, they should never be able to do more than what a user can do. But you probably also want to rate limit things that are expensive. Like if it's very easy to run a very expensive query, or to,
Ah,
spin up a bunch of VMs or things like that, by accident. That would be great if that wouldn't happen. You might not want to give it access to super sensitive operations, like maybe deleting your account or deleting your other users' accounts or data or that type of thing. Probably not something you want it to give an agent access to, even if you don't think it will ever use it. Right? That's the principle of least privilege in security. So I think the concerns there are more like these AI agents that are making non-deterministic decisions. Can we build some guardrails to keep ourselves safe? And how do we limit the set of permissions that they have so that they are not going and making decisions that we're going to find really painful to go undo?
we talked to someone yesterday who is leading a project called Parlant, Parlant, and it's essentially I describe it as they provide like guidelines for customer agents. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what's behind it is reasoning, building reasoning into the algorithms. And it almost seems like we're seeing that here. Like we're going to need that kind of reasoning built into authorization credentials because, as you were saying, right, we don't know if it's going to be right or not, or but if you had some reasoning built into it, you might be able to find a better percentage that it's not going to hallucinate or get it wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly good point, right? And like, I think like this is also some of the excitement around DeepSeek. It's doing a lot of the thinking and pre-processing and asking itself questions before it answers a query. Um, at some point though, we build so many guardrails that do we even need the agent? If you say, hey, you can never do this thing, and this thing should always be more than 10, and that thing should always be whatever, like what is the intelligence for anymore, right? Like I have a rice cooker that says that it has AI on it, right? And like that's not, I wouldn't trust it to change my cloud policies, right? I barely trust it to cook the rice. So like at what point are we actually is this just deterministic again?
Yeah, exactly. It gets interesting too, because this seems to affect not just the like the web environment as we're talking about, but this also has an infrastructure implication as well. And it also has um, implications related to the operating system. And I think you talk a little bit about that, right? We don't really have this capability right now to use the operating system permissions properly for handling AI agents. And you talk a little bit about that, but is that problematic? Or is that just a little bit too far out?
I think like a lot of things in this space, it's gonna come at us much quicker than we realize.
Yeah.
The limitations for, like, to your point, like on device, I would like to be able to control, Claude MCP has access to only these files and can run only these kinds of commands and can use only this percent of memory and that type of thing. You have some of those controls today. You don't have all of those controls. You're talking about, Apple and Windows making changes to make that possible. And I think it'll be an interesting question for them from both a, strategic and non-competitive point of view as to what they're going to actually make possible, right? Apple obviously wants to sell you Siri. Microsoft is very invested in OpenAI. Like how easy are they going to make it to plug in to my desktop and do things with a third party agent? I don't know.
Could we get a little bit more into limitations though of OAuth and talk a little bit about that? Because what I was talking to a friend of mine, Johnny Kieram, MSV, he writes a lot about AI. He's an analyst in the space.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking to me about long-term persistence issues, right? With OAuth tokens, for instance, that could expire over time. And that becomes problematic because as he describes it, agents are headless and can't perform that multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think the problem that you're referring to is, for example, if I go, authenticate to a SaaS app with and I want to give it access to OpenAI. Right now, what I do is I give it an API key. And what I can't do is then re-authenticate that multiple times over time and say, yes, this thing should still have access to this in both directions, right? Like OpenAI should both still have access to this app, and this app is still authorized to use my maybe my personal or my corporate open API key. Sorry, OpenAI key. OAuth. So API keys tend to be long lived. So people tend to have API keys expire, which is what makes this hard. OAuth tokens are meant to have a long lived token from which you derive short lived access tokens. So it is easier to revoke or remove access. That being said, that still requires someone to implement it that way. So if all you're doing is moving to OAuth and then having never expiring OAuth tokens, that doesn't really solve your problem either. The example that you're talking about around having MFA of like maybe every single time an agent takes a critical action, I want it to reauth or I want to reapprove it or something like that. We don't even have that for humans today in a lot of organizations or circumstances. So I think it's a world to aspire to. I think it's realistically where we are today.
Yeah, that's fair. But we'll get there faster than we think, right?
That's always the hope.
Well, that's what you said is always the reality too.
Yeah. Yeah.
He also brought into this idea that we need to be thinking about a new layer. And he said, says that before OAuth, that's more agent friendly and suited for these long-term running processes, And so, for instance, he mentions expecting, Auth0 to potentially take the lead in solving authentication problems. Um, is it more wide open than that? Okta for sure has lots of people who can, who can work on this kind of problem. But I'm curious in your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know who I think will take the lead. I think that um, Auth0 is still very widely used, and so if they were going to make a big push here, then that would push a lot of the industry forward. Again, this goes back to sort of like the SSO tax situation. If you've already invested in a solution that lets you support SSO, you probably are going to be willing to invest in a solution that also lets you support OAuth more easily. It's definitely better to be selling shovels here rather than going and shoveling panning for the gold yourself. So like if you can be selling someone implementing OAuth, implementing AI agent support, that is potentially an interesting place to be.
Wow. Yeah, for sure. I also talked to him a little bit about other ways to think about authentication and authorization issues.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned, for instance, AuthZed, which looks at it from like a relationship-based access control
Yep.
capability. What's your view on those alternatives, such as AuthZed?
Yeah. I won't speak on behalf of AuthZed, obviously. AuthZed is to my understanding, is like a customer identity and access management solution. So
Yeah.
it's sort of like with Auth0, but around how you manage your authorization in for those customers over your resources. The I think I don't know that we're going to need something significantly different for AI agents in terms of how we manage those authorizations. I think that what might be different is the scale and speed at which we need those things to be true. And whether the right model is something like relational based access control RBAC, whether it's something more traditional like ABAC or RBAC, I think is very much up in the air and like until the implementation details of what will make sense. The scale is going to be a scale that we haven't dealt with before in a lot of these environments.
What speaks to that in your view, that it's a scale we haven't thought of before?
Um, how many number of users do we have in the world? How many number of computers do we have? Then, if you think about like how quickly these numbers get large, right? Like users to computers, computers to like VMs, VMs to containers, containers to functions, functions to LLMs. You're talking about like exponential growth in the number of things that you need to go support. Supporting authorization for users, a very large organization might have 500,000 users. It would not shock me that a very small organization ends up having 500,000 agents, right? And so I think whatever solutions do well in this space will need to really support that scale.
Just in conclusion, Maya, what are you up to? What's on your plate? Are you mentioned something about a stealth operation or organization that you're looking at developing. Is it in this realm?
It's in the identity and access management space. Yes, I am not specifically working on AI agents.
Okay.
I can tell you we're called Oblique Security. We are really excited to be building something that I think is going to be useful to help organizations manage employee entitlements at scale, and specifically scale access changes, securely and automatically. I think I'm hearing a lot of. If I go back to why do I not think AI authorization is such a big problem right now? This is the thing that people were complaining to me about. And so if this is what customers are frustrated with today, that's what I want to go work on. So that's what we're going to do. Yeah.
So they're complaining then about just the very basic access controls that they don't have.
Very basic access control. I mean, I say basic, right? I don't think anything is basic anymore, but yeah, the same old problems that we've had for the last 10, 20 years are still the problems that we have today.
Yeah, they don't just erase and go away like deleting the treasury or something like that.
No, they don't. Yeah, not at all. I think there's only a couple of things that we've had in security that have really been wholesale changes with like that remove classes of problems, like memory safe languages. Like what
Right.
a win for security, right? Like we don't get a lot of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Memory safe security is a pretty good thing to have.
Yeah.
Well, Maya, thank you so much for taking some time to talk today.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's been great.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.